My name is Mark Bylock, whiskey author, reviewer, and podcaster, and today we're reviewing the Arran Sherry Bodega. I bought this whiskey recently for a couple of whiskey tastings that I'm hosting, and the reason is people love a sherry bomb. A sherry bomb is a scotch that has primary sherry flavors. You can tell by the darker color. It's been matured in ex-sherry barrels. Now, this looks like it's 100% aged in sherry casks, maybe not entirely. And I think there's a few misconceptions about this whiskey already. It is cask strength. It says on the label natural cask strength, and it is a sherry hogshead 250 liter barrel. I think some of the implications here that it might be a single cask sherry, I'm going to argue against that. And one of the reasons is it's 55.8% alcohol by volume. And that's true no matter what you get from 2 years ago to today. And that implies that the whiskey is being matured and then proofed down to that 55.8 level. And there's a good reason for that. And it doesn't have anything to do with you, consumer, or me, consumer. It has more to do with bottling and labeling. When a distillery releases a new whiskey, as long as the label's the same, they don't have to apply for new labels. But if they were, for example, to release this in 55.8 and then 55.3 and then 54.5, now you're creating a new label and a new product, and it causes a lot of confusion in the marketplace. So I think what Arran's done here is they've created a 55.8 proof point and get it to there by either having older or younger whiskeys in the batch. Chances are this has been batched, and there are many sherry hogsheads, 25 liters, and they're all being poured in so that you can get that 55.8% ABV. It does say natural cask strength, which to me tells me it has not been watered down, and it hasn't been chill filtered nor colored. So each batch of this will be a little different, and you'll see differences in reviews from 2 years ago to today. Is it a single cask bottling? I don't think so. My guess is that they have a bunch of sherry matured single malt scotch that they have, and then they basically play around with the proof point to some margin of error to get it to 55.8%. It's probably blended into one individual barrel and then moved across, or maybe they do it in a vat process in the last stage to get it to 55.8. There's no batching information on this whatsoever, and any other uniqueness to this beyond what it says. Saying all that is nothing against the whiskey, because 100% sherry matured cask strength single malt scotch is rare, and it's wonderful, and it's got a very wonderful clientele of whiskey drinkers that really enjoy high proof but sweet character driven whiskeys. So let's have a nose. I have tasted this before because I'm using it for a couple of tastings, so I had to find its order as where it is in the tasting, and I have to say right on the first pour it was pretty quiet, and so I'm curious to see how the second/third pour will do. It is overpowering on the nose. It is very boozy. It doesn't nose like a younger whiskey. Again, we don't know what the age is, but it's probably in that 7 to 8 to 9 year old era. But it does have kind of that little bit over oak note, that fermented fruit note that is quite lovely, and sherry cask drinkers generally really prefer that note. It is very quiet though. Otherwise, it doesn't offer too much on the nose, and that's not a surprise. Cask strength whiskeys are so powerful that generally the nose is pretty quiet. I could add a couple of drops of water in this and it'll open up wonderfully, but for now I'm just going to leave it without water. Let's try the palate. It's got what you'd expect: cinnamon. There's just a crunch of cask finished sherry hogshead notes. It's got cinnamon, so much spice, like paprika spice. It's got some white pepper spice as well, a very oaky. I got some like notes of vanilla in it as well. And it's very buttery, it's very rich, which is really great because normally if you have a younger whiskey that hasn't been aged long enough, that buttery note is absent. This definitely has this buttery cinnamon finish, which is lovely. And because it has a high ABV, if you're used to high ABV whiskeys, you're going to get a lot of activity on the palate, and it's really good. I initially scored this an 89. I probably scored it somewhere between an 88 and an 89 on a scale of 100, which is really great for the price point that this whiskey is, under $100, and definitely a crowd pleaser. Now, I want to say something a little bit different about this whiskey as well, because I've tasted a lot of Arran single malt scotch in my days, and I found that the earlier bottlings moved more towards the distillate. Like they're very focused on the distillation process and how well it's been fermented and distilled in the process of making whiskey. Arran Distillery is one of those distilleries that doesn't rush anything. And they create these really subtle, beautiful, wonderful whiskeys that are just, they're polite. They're polite single malt scotches. You nose them and you think, oh yes, I'm in polite company. And you nose it and you sip it and it's great. When I first tasted this, I was like, wow, this is not the Arran distillery that I'm used to. In fact, this is more the kind of very loud rock music kind of single malt scotch, that heavy metal single malt scotch. There's nothing polite about this. It's in your face. If you have a friend that doesn't like single malt scotch, they'll probably be mad at you for a week if you have them taste this. So it's very unlike Arran Distillery to release a whiskey like this. They have been doing it for a few years now. This isn't brand new. But I'm curious what this means for the distillery. Are they trying to attract a different kind of clientele? Where they're trying to go with this direction that this whiskey takes? But overall, I think what I'm really enjoying out of this, especially letting it sit out a little bit, and especially with cask strength whiskey, if you let it sit out, some of the alcohol will evaporate. So instead of watering it down, you can just let the alcohol evaporate normally. And you're going to get that fermented fruit quality that's on that verge of being spoiled, but not quite yet. When fruit is at its sweetest, I'm thinking mostly about raspberries and blackberries, when it's just there. It's at the sweetest, ripest moment. It's very nice. There's definitely like hints of oak or smoke, like just little bits of that smoky charred oak note in it as well. And I gotta say, I don't know if this has been 100% aged in sherry casks, but on my tasting notes even earlier, I did get some vanilla notes. I'm getting that now, a little bit more lemon notes once you cut through all that sweetness. If I was guessing, if I was a betting person, I would say this has probably been aged in American oak for some period of time and then has been moved to sherry casks, but could be wrong. I mean, there's no rules around it. I think the thing we don't quite appreciate as Scotch drinkers is when it says sherry cask head, that just really means it's been there in this last stage. It might have been there for 6 months, for 12 months, for 3 years. Distilleries are allowed to take 2 barrels and combine it into one, or especially 2 smaller barrels, so like 2 bourbon barrels and combine it into 1 sherry barrel. It's not a big deal. What I think though is the oak they used here is excellent. The sherry oak program is really excellent. The barrel is very clearly very forward on the nose and also on the palate. Yeah, definitely getting a little bit of American oak on there. That could also be just a reused European oak cask as well. It's really hard to identify the differences depending on the history of that cask. So depending on how often that cask has been reused, depending on, for example, maybe they allowed the whiskey to blend in the last step was a very highly reused sherry cask. That way they can tamper the flavors down a little bit, and maybe that's the influence I'm tasting. But anyway, this is just a crunch of cask strength sherry flavor. If you like Aberlour Abunda, this will be right up your alley. It's certainly up my alley, and I hope you enjoy it. For under $100, I think this hits the right price point for a whiskey this strong. The best thing about cask strength whiskey is if you don't like it, if you think this is a little too strong for you, just add a few drops and you'll get to that point where it's going to be the perfect whiskey for you. So cheers.